All right, so to start off with, by show of hands, who has ever deployed an Elixir app in any kind of way? And what are you doing here?
It was hard.
Yeah, it is. But what are you doing here? Aren't you the one speaking? Okay, how many of you have deployed an app not using Docker? Okay, how many of you have deployed, specifically an Elixir app every time? How many of you have deployed one using Docker in some form? Docker, Convox, Kubernetes. Okay, so we've got actually a pretty good mix. We've got people, most people have deployed an Elixir app in some way. It looks like most of those have deployed something in it using Docker, some and not using, with some doing one or the other, and a few who have not deployed. So I'm going to not assume anything. We're just kind of going to start from the ground up. By show of hands, one more time, who has not used Docker ever? Like, for whom this would be just new? Okay, a couple. All right then. So to make this a little less intimidating, I'm going to talk about the setup real quick. Here on this tab number 1, I'm running everything locally on my machine. Here on this tab, I've deliberately given it a different color scheme and just tried to make it separate. This is running on my server at home. Right here, this is running Linux. It's got Docker installed already, so I'm not going to go through that. There's instructions on Docker's website that are pretty copy-paste for how to install the latest version of Docker on a server. So I'm not going to go into that. But we'll talk a little bit about what Docker is, how we can use it to set up an Elixir app, just doing, not even using releases, just normal, like putting the code on there and putting it out. What concerns are around that, and go from there. We can start adding complexity like, oh yeah, I kind of need a database for my app. We can start thinking about, okay, what happens if the app crashes for a minute? Do I have to manually go in and restart it? What if you want more than one server? And talking, as you start thinking about these concerns, deployment becomes a much, much more complicated thing than can be covered in a single hour. So we're going to start with the simplest thing and work our way up until we run out of time. Or interest, whichever hits first. So jumping back here locally, this is an app that I presented on 4 or 5 months ago. When LiveView first came out, this was my, okay, let's do something. Secret Hitler is kind of a board game, but not really a board game that you play as a group. It's a social deduction game where you're trying to figure out who the fascists are, which of them is Hitler, and trying to kill him. Or if you're a fascist, trying to get him elected. But the particulars of that aren't terribly important, but we're going to try and deploy it. One convenient thing about this app is it doesn't need a database at all. So we can start with the simplest possible thing of getting an Elixir app started on a server. So the simplest thing is here on the server, I could do something like apt-get install Elixir and mix-deps-get, mix-compile, and mix-phx.run. And boom, I'm running, just like local. That's tedious and causes issues. So we're going to start around Docker, just because if you can depend on fewer things being on your server, like Erlang and Elixir. Oh, and if you're compiling NIFs from dependencies, now you also need make and whatever your distro's build tooling is. Build Essential in Debian, for example. So instead, we're just going to start with Docker. I'm going to delete the Docker file I have here because that's probably going to be a little intimidating. I've used just about every trick in the book I can to make it fast, because this app uses YView, so it needs JavaScript. Yeah, trying to build that. Anyways, you'll see why I'll show you that file later. So we're going to start by creating a Dockerfile. A Dockerfile is just a description of how to build your container, the thing that your app is going to run in. I'm going to say there's an official Elixir image, and just because I'm impatient, I'm going to use the Alpine version, just because I don't have time to wait on the download. So we start by saving. We're just going to Docker build, and we're going to say, Docker, I want you to look in this directory for all of your stuff. So dot. Great, we've successfully built an image containing Elixir. We can do, so this little SHA right here is, I said I wouldn't make assumptions, so I'm trying to step back for a second here. All right, so when you're dealing with virtual machines, you can start up a virtual machine, you've got your OS running in there. From that, you can create an image of your virtual machine, so that you take that image, put it on another computer, and it starts up. And you take that image and put it on another computer, and it starts up too. And so you have it running on 2 computers. It's already built and going, and there it is. With Docker, we have a similar concept. An image is kind of analogous to a class in programming, and a container is analogous to an object. So one is a description of what all these things are, and the image, and a container is a specific instance of that. So I can say Docker run in this image that we just made, create a new container, and I just want you to run ash. Alpine does not come with bash by default, it comes with ash. So pretty analogous here. Little problem. When you just say Docker run, it starts up in the background, but it doesn't connect to your terminal at all. It assumes backgrounded by default. So if I just add the flags -I because it's interactive, and T because I want it to connect to my terminal, TTY, now I can run this same command, and now I have my ash shell here. Elixir is indeed there. It is the latest version, unless I have a cached one locally, of course. Sure. 1.9 Alpine. So on the left side, Elixir is which image I want. I could pull just a plain Jessie, a Debian one, or I could pull a plain Alpine. On the right side of the colon are the tags, so I can say I want 1.9 of Elixir. I want 1.9 on Alpine, and they have a bunch of these already pre-built on Docker Hub. So great, I had one of those cached locally. Notice the image ID is different now. And boom, I can do whatever I want with Elixir here. I have 1.91 cached here locally, and that's fine. But that's not terribly interesting. I've basically just shown you how to get a shell, which you already have on your machine. So let's start doing something. APK add, you know what? All right, so here's the one that I end up with. It's about 50 lines of commands, probably 35 if you take out white space. But what I really care about is just this right here. I'm going to install hex, I'm going to install rebar just like you would do locally normally. Run APK update. APK is my package manager in Alpine. I'm going to make sure I have Git, Node.js, npm, inotify, bash, curl, tar, and xz installed because I need them for various things. So docker build dot. Oops. So to Dockerfile, there we go. So here's the Dockerfile again, docker build dot. So at this point, I'm going to do the simplest thing. This is not good for performance in any way, like for rebuilding quickly, iterating quickly, but I'm going to copy my everything from here into the container. So all my code is there, my build directory is in there, my lib, my config, my mixexs, it just all gets copied over into this container. And that's pretty quick, it's just a copy command. So I can, I'm going to change this command a little bit. Tag, I'm going to call this Meetup. So now I can docker run -it meetup ash. Well, technically I can actually do bash now because we installed it up above. Right here. Live demos. Gotta love them. Okay, kill that. Docker build dot. I'm just not going to cheat. I'll do this the annoying way. Okay, so so it's the bash part that's killing it. Interesting. Wonder why that is. I'm starting with the simplest thing.
Okay.
I'm going to show why the simplest possible thing is bad and slowly add more things.
Okay, cool.
It's like video games. You don't just put, here's the entire skill tree, just one thing at a time.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, so ls. Well, this is, it's here up in my root directory. Not in a home directory, not anywhere else, like right up in the root.
Nice.
That feels a little icky to me. So we're going to say, okay, before we do the copy, let's run in our /app directory. You could put this whatever you want. If the directory doesn't exist, it will create it for you. But we're going to say any commands we run inside of this /app directory. So we're going to build again. I do have a build script here, so I'm going to stop that. Bin build. Okay, and it's now got the correct tag, and I'm going to bin bash. There we go. So you can see we are in that /app directory. We can see all of our stuff is here and none of our root level directories. But everything's in. So we could actually do mix deps.get and mix compile right now if we wanted. But that would be really annoying to do every time I'm trying to start my app. So instead, what we're going to do is in our Dockerfile, when we're building our image, we're going to say, okay, mix deps.get and mix compile. Well, no, you can't do ampersand, ampersand. Yes, you can.
You can do the mixed do.
That's true, you can. Mix do deps.get, comma, mix compile. So bin build. And this is why we're going to learn real quick, just copy ... sucks. Because every time you change any file, it's going to have to go through the deps.get and mix compile flow again, make a change, run, oh, got it. Deps get and compile. No, we're going to speed this up a bit because I'm too impatient, and I hope you are too, because we only have, what, an hour or so? So what we're going to do is instead, we're just going to copy mix.exs and mix.lock to / well, mix.exs and mix. So from one cool thing you can do, if I wanted, I could copy mix.exs from my local directory and call it mix.something here, and that would work in the container. So mix.exs wouldn't exist in the container. But once we have the exs and lock, we have enough information for mix to run deps.get for us. So the only what Docker does is it runs each of these commands in order. If it can tell that the previous command, the results of that have not changed at all, it can skip it because it's cached. I feel like that wasn't really understood. So questions at this point? Or rather, I feel like I didn't say that very well. Questions at this point?
So you're defining your work directory with @/app,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're immediately copying stuff in. Is that going into the work directory, or
Yes.
is that going? Okay.
Yes.
I guess I'm just viewing it as like makedir on bash, and that doesn't necessarily cd you into that directory.
Correct.
So this does, when you define it as work directory, it says moving forward, here's where you are.
Yep.
Okay.
And if I wanted, I could do workdir again to /code or something, and from this point on, it would run in code.
Okay.
So it's a combination of makedir and cd.
Why do you specify mix.exs as the destination rather than just dot?
Is that an option? Because my Docker knowledge is not perfect, and apparently you can do that.
I think so.
Let's see.
Basically, it's just saying the target name. It's the source name, like from his computer into the image as the target.
Well, what do you know? It works. So yeah, you can do that. That saves me a few keystrokes. I like that. So then we're going to run mix-deps-get because we have enough information, even without config, even without lib. When you run mix-deps-get, it doesn't need any of that. So we can just say build, and it will deps-get. I didn't see any other hands, but were there any other questions at this point?
I'm doing the Docker build, and it's not clearing out stuff again.
Clearing out stuff again?
Or it's like I'm not getting the copy into the new location. But it should be doing that because things have changed, right? So
If you have changed the contents of a...
What was the question?
I'm just not getting something here, so I'm not sure where I went wrong.
So, okay, what may be going, okay, I think I know why. So when I'm running build, I am tagging my image with a name. So if you're using the SHA, even if you do a rebuild and you use the SHA when you do Docker run, you're going into your old build.
The old image, the old build, right.
So you can see here in my bash script,
Yeah.
I'm actually doing a little extra here. We're just going to ignore these things for a moment. I'm saying secret Hitler game, so mine gets updated every time.
Okay, yep.
Little bits of magic I'm doing. Sorry about that. I lied and said I wouldn't make assumptions, and here I am. Alright, so Dockerfile, mixsteps, run mixsteps.get. And then at that point, you can't just compile all of your dependencies because your config can affect the compilation of your dependencies. So now we want to copy config over to dot. So config is indeed No, that was not what I was hoping for.
You wanted the folder?
Yes, I did. I wonder why it copied though.
The contents of the folder?
Yes, it did. It did the contents of the folder. Huh. See if that changes it slightly. No. All right, so we're doing this. There we go. So there are some weirdnesses apparently if you're just using dot for your destination. There we go. Now we have our config directory as expected. So at this point, we can actually run mix compile, and that will be okay. And I'm going to do my darndest not to touch the config files tonight, because like I've said several times already, I'm too impatient to wait on a deps compile. Except for this once when we have to. Oh. We're going to do deps.compile, because if we don't do that, we'll have to wait again when we change that in a few minutes. So I guess this is almost becoming a little more of a course on how to optimize building Docker images in Elixir. Mixed deps compile will work fine. So now I can actually copy ... and it's going to be okay. And then run mix compile, and then we should be good to go.
If they're not in your Docker ignore, would that copy your deps and build?
Yes, which we'll get to in a minute. But since we'll be past the deps.compile, I just want to get through this part as fast as I can. Questions while we're waiting? John?
I don't know if you noticed, but will copy ... be smart enough to know, like, oh, we've already copied this one?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll copy over everything.
Copies the whole file structure every time.
Okay.
For one file thing, is that what it's?
Like,
Yeah.
so we've already
Well,
copied
it'll always
mix.exs and mix.lock.
Even if you don't change it.
Yeah.
Right. So mix.exs, mix.lock, and config are already copied over. When I do copy ... it's going to copy them again. But the file contents haven't changed from here to there, so okay. But if there were extra, yeah. And now we can see we have our build directory, we have stuff compiled, and we're not going to have to wait on that again tonight. But there is another little thing we can do. So now, so you can see on these steps, I have some warnings. I thought I fixed them today. Sorry guys, you'll have to see them a bunch of times. You can see that which steps are cached already, and here which ones are not. So I had previously done the copy ... but hadn't run mix compile. Now I do this again, and now mix compile is cached. If I go in and I change, I don't know, this, let's say this build command, I add an extra new line here. I run build, that busts the cache, it busts the cache at copy ... and so it has to run mix compile again, even though that doesn't actually affect Elixir. Okay, so now we have a Docker image. And we can actually run stuff in here. So I'm going to use this REPL script, which does a little bit of magic for this particular app. But all that it does is it runs, what's up?
Quick, grab the signing salt.
And that script's actually just for this meetup. Yeah. So, in fact, you can see I have a script for generating another one, and for actually this reason. Alright, so all this does is it runs in my Docker container IEX mix phx.server. So I do bin repl, and does some magic for envars for me, because using just raw Docker is a huge pain in the butt. Especially with envars, because you have to specify, like, I want host to be this, mixenv to be prod, I want secret Hitler signing salt to be this, like, listing those out in a script. Like, for host and mixenv, that's fine, but if you have a secret like this, you don't want to commit that to your GitHub, to your Git repo. And so that's another place where deploying starts becoming more complicated, and it's nice to just say, yes, Heroku, please set this envar for me, or whatever system of choice.
But you can, just so you guys know, you can put the mixenv prod in your Docker file.
Yes, which we'll actually get to.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No worries.
Ignore that.
Don't ignore it, he's right. So if I run localhost 4000,
No, port nothing, right?
Exposed.
yep, expose, oh, that's because it's the REPL one. I have it exposed in the actual raw run. And this is why I hate raw Docker. Like, there's lots of layers of tooling on top of Docker. It's why Docker Swarm and Kubernetes and Convox and Heroku all exist, because using raw Docker is just awful. So I'm going to map port 4000 to 4000. Can you do the mapping with expose, or?
Yeah. Is it exposed or exposed?
Well, you're right, it is expose. Thank you.
I thought it was published to do that.
So there is an expose and there's a publish. Expose, you have to specify the port, like just the port. But publish, which is the right one, I was like, wait, it's not expose. Publish is the right one. Thank you, John. That one lets you specify a mapping like this. So I can say port 4000 in my container, map to port 3000 on my machine. But I wonder.
The machine port is the first one, the container port is the,
Yes.
the right
Container to host.
host container.
Host container. Does Docker Compose make it backwards then?
It's still host container on the right.
Okay.
And for reference, you can use just -p instead of host.
Yep. So if you do docker run -- help, you can see there's a lot of options here. And some of them have short versions, like publish does with -p. In this case, I'm just trying to make it more readable for everyone. But that is a good point. You don't have to do the long flags. So why is that failing? Oh, because I didn't escape the new line. Bashisms. Wait, what? Oh,
Because it's in your source file, your source tree, huh?
this line. Mixenv is prod. When we did that whole big compile thing in our machine, we never specified our mixenv. And so if you don't specify mixenv, which env does Elixir assume?
Dev.
Dev.
So why are you doing prod and dev?
There are times when I prefer to, and there are times when I don't, especially when I'm trying to get better parity with prod. Sometimes that gives up conveniences. There have been times when I've just gotten rid of like dev, test, and prod, dev and prod EXS and put them all into config, and used envars just so I wouldn't have to deal with dev versus prod. But you know what? We don't need to tonight. So I much prefer that. So we have our app running with a REPL. And if we go to 4000, now it's working. We haven't compiled, we haven't done any of our npm install stuff. This is why I just have my one that I copy paste to every app. So here's where it gets fun with Docker caching. So if you're deving on the order matters when you're doing Dockerfile, right? So if I'm not deving on the JS stuff, I probably want to do that like before anything else. That way if I change a config file, I don't have to recompile all of my JS assets. But if I am deving on the JS stuff, then that becomes the worst case scenario. It's like a sorting algorithm where, yeah, I can optimize for this, but then I get the worst case when I change anything. And that's why, you know, we're not changing any JS files. We're going to do it the simplest possible way tonight. So we have Node.js and npm installed from up here, right? So we can, in fact, we're going to do this after the deps.compile just because run workdir to our app assets, and then run npm install. And then, do you have to run any other commands? I forget, like, do you have to do mix phx digest or anything at this point?
Yes.
So that be actually I think and you run that inside the Elixir.
So we get to npmi. Questions at this point? Because this is going to take a while. Did I have it cached or something?
I
No such file.
There's no package JSON in your assets file.
What? It's right there. Package log, package JSON.
But
And
it's
I haven't
not-
done
it's not
copy dot
copied.
dot.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
copied yet.
okay. Copy assets to assets. And let's do that before we change to the assets directory.
Oh, I see.
Does work
That's
directory
the one.
create another image layer?
Yes, yes, I'm not even going to say that out loud. Just,
Yeah.
yes. If you know what the question meant, you know what that
Well,
says.
in that case, npm has an option, I think it's called path, where you can have it. Prefix, thanks,
Mhm.
Dennis, yeah. So you don't have to CD or work directory into assets. So you can, so after.
I need this. So what would I do? npm prefix? Oh, install prefix. And then I could just do like assets.
Yeah.
You don't need the /, right?
Thank you guys.
And then you won't need your workdir after that, right?
You're right. Questions at this point?
Wouldn't you potentially be copying over your node modules?
Yes, we'll get there in a moment.
And yes,
See,
that causes
Just
problems.
knowing that's like 100 meg file.
Yeah,
Probably not.
almost every time I go to a new team and this is going on, that's one of the first things I check. Is that Docker ignore set up to not to the build over, not do your
No modules.
node modules? And about 50-50 it is and isn't. It depends on the team. If they're impatient people like me, it's there because it does not take long to annoy you. And otherwise, yay, now we get to start optimizing.
It can cause problems.
Oh, I believe that.
Yes. So this wasn't an Elixir project, but I switched teams at my company a couple weeks ago to the data engineering team, and they're doing some stuff with Airflow. And when they run certain things, it runs in a Docker container, but when they run other things, it runs locally, not in a container. And that created a Python install in my directory that I didn't know about. So every time I tried to build the image, it was copying over a gig into this container, and I'm sitting there just like, what is going on? Oh, that got fixed real quick. All right, so I'm sorry, remind me of your name?
Evan.
Evan Maydal. I recognize you from Slack. I just couldn't, I don't know what the E in that email stood for. Oh, John?
Cody, if you don't mind, just a commentary here. The fact that you're iterating and doing this again and again and again just shows how awesome Docker is compared to doing virtual machines, because a virtual machine take a lot longer to set up and do all this stuff, and it's not quite right, and then we gotta do it again. So Docker is really good for iterating and learning and yeah.
Do you think that comment got picked up in the
I can see it did.
Okay, good. And I totally agree. I 100% agree. So like you start going through these things, and if this is your first time, you don't have someone to ask questions, it gets really painful. And so if you're introducing this somewhere, sometimes people, it creates that emotional, It's kind of like if I say, hey guys, how about we build our next app in PHP? What reaction do you have there, right? So if someone has that bad experience where they tried it out and didn't know all these little tricks and tips, didn't have someone to ask, you can get that emotional block if you're going to a place where they've experienced that. So just always be sure to assure people that it gets better. It gets better. So yes, the git ignore or Docker ignore was the next comment that came up. So is it just Docker ignore or is it .docker ignore?
Docker.
Thank you.
It doesn't exist.
Actually, it might already be there. Yep, it does. So more assumptions. Every time we've been running this, we have not been copying the build, deps, .env, or the Dockerfile over. I don't remember why I added the Dockerfile, but I remember it was annoying me in some way.
It's not needed.
No, like normally it's not, but there was, like I was doing something really weird and funky, and it was like, so in the normal case you don't need it there, but there was something I was doing at that moment where it was helpful. And we want to do assets, node modules. And so you can see that npm install has already been cached. So already, like to me, that deserves a standing ovation for Docker. And then I'm just totally going to take that back the moment I say, oops, we messed up our config. Let's change, it's actually secrethitler.repos or something. Or how about we change we messed up the spelling of the envar. It's just the signing sol, not signing salt. And so we run build again, and we've just busted our cache clear back here. So we get to do deps get, mix deps compile, and npm install again. There are ways around this. In fact, now that we've gotten to this point, I'm going to show you why that exact problem, the npm install every time you make a change, is exactly why I went through all the complication of this approach. So I'm going to put my Dockerfile, dockerfile.meetup again, and this is what's called a multi-stage Dockerfile. So what I do is I say, starting up at the top, it looks very similar. This one, this part of my Docker build pipeline, I'm going to just call Elixir. And I install Hex, I install Rebar, I update my APK, install my tools. In this case, I'm setting mixenv as prod. By default, you can override that in the command line with a flag. So that just sets it as a default. And we're going through, and everything looks pretty much the same, except I'm not doing anything with the JavaScript. So now, I start again. I start with an empty Elixir Alpine. I call this one JavaScript. I run my APK update, APK install a few things. And then from this Elixir image up here, right? I can copy my app assets and my app deps. I don't have to work their app assets anymore now that you guys told me about the prefix flag. And in this separate, I'm running npm install. So these are two separate builds going on. This one depends on that one, so they can't be entirely parallel, right? But there's some caching. Like all I'm doing, so this is responsible strictly for the npm install. And lastly, I have a third one, which just does the Elixir Alpine. This is the one that ends up getting deployed. Run through the same steps. I copy from Elixir my app, like everything from there, because it's already been compiled, deps has already been done. And from JavaScript, I can copy all my static stuff. So now, if I change a config file, I still have to do mixdeps compile, but the npm install stuff is unchanged because nothing in assets changed. Thank goodness most of that was cached. And so is my npm install from a previous run of this. So I can go in, I can change something in here, add a new line there. So I still have to do mix compile again, but none of the JavaScript, the npm install, had to be rerun. Right here, that was cached because it wasn't dependent on any of the code in lib or config or anything but assets. Now, one caveat to that, there are certain Phoenix JavaScript dependencies that depend on JavaScript provided in the package, like the Elixir package.
In the mixed steps.
Yes, in the mixed steps. So in that case, sometimes you can still shoot yourself in the foot, where you still have to copy deps over, you change the config, so then you sometimes still have that, sometimes. And so in this case, let's check real quick. If I add a new line here, what breaks? I have to deps compile.
Hey Cody.
Yes.
While this is happening, is that Dockerfile online anywhere?
Yes. I'm not going to tell you though.
Cool.
This is using an old version of LiveView. It has Lodash, and that version of Lodash has a critical security vulnerability. Don't run this. You don't have the rights to Secret Hitler. Don't actually deploy this. But the Dockerfile.
I think Secret Hitler is actually open source. Like
Oh, really?
yeah, the board game is under Creative Commons license,
Oh, cool.
so they give you a little leeway with it.
So,
Either way, though, this is going to like speed up some stuff I'm doing like a lot.
I'm glad it
So-
could help. So now we actually have a deployable image. So I'm just going to, this is just a raw run, Docker run with the envars getting in there. Localhost 4000, and there we go. And this time our assets were actually compiled. Well, something wrong with my app, but that has nothing to do with deployment or Docker. Yeah, so you jump over to a server. And so now, if you could just do, if this is on a server, you could do Docker run these things, and there you go. You have now deployed if you have SSH access and the ability to install Git and get your code. So this is kind of the simplest fewest moving parts way. We did some optimizations in the Dockerfile because I'm too impatient to just sit here and iterate with copy dot dot mix compile, right? But simplest possible thing. Questions? Where do we want to go from here?
So, would like the next step be using Phoenix releases, for example, or is that not even next step? What would next step be?
It could be. If you want to use Phoenix. So that gets into a discussion, should you use Phoenix releases? Some people say yes, some people say no. It's,
Is Phoenix releases different than mixed release?
no, that is exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah, mixed releases, sorry. Listen to me just copycatting mindlessly.
I have a question, like, for some people raise their hands that have deployed without Docker, and I'm wondering, why would you deploy without Docker versus Docker? Is one better than the other? I know that, because the versions, like basically you have to compile your code on the same machine, and so Docker really helped with that, but I'm just curious why other people have maybe not used Docker.
One of the most common reasons people don't use Docker in deployment is never having used Docker, right? Same as like with any kind of tool. Why aren't people using Vagrant? Well, most of the time it's because they've never used Vagrant and don't want to. So substitute Docker for any tool there, I think would be the biggest thing.
What? It seems like deploying Elixir apps is so coupled to using Docker. How would you do this without
I mean,
Docker?
I didn't, and mostly just, well, I had never used Docker really like this. We have really dumb Docker scripts that make it look bad. This looks way better. But yeah, also we didn't really have Docker deploy targets, right? We just had Amazon EC2 instances. And you can put Docker on them, right? You can, but also you can put Elixir tarball on them, like there's
Yep.
release built on them. This and, so in my case it was just like, well, it's an EC2 instance, so here's your Elixir release build, right? And it just runs.
So if you do, yep, exactly that. Just in case that didn't get picked up by the microphone, he was saying you could just do mix release on your build server, copy that tarball somewhere on an EC2 instance or in a Docker container even, is actually where we're moving towards at my work. And then there's nothing that, the only thing you really need is bash, I think, right? Like.
Oh, just with a built release?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But what Denver was saying, why would you do this without Docker? One less tool. I mean, you could just do apt-get install Elixir, assuming you have a box that's fairly persistent, right? Maybe your organization doesn't have the tooling to be able to spin up servers really quickly. Like they're doing on-premise stuff, and so it's really easy to just to use like mix compiles. Oh, I'll only compile the stuff that's not already there, right? That consistently. I'm trying to think of how to word what I'm saying here, and I'm not wording good, and I'm sorry, guys. Or like, it's just there, right? Docker has the immutable file system, but if you're just incrementally updating your app, git pull, mix compile, stop the app, restart the app for a second, and for some people that's fine.
So was your question, how would you do it without it, or why?
Yeah, both.
So for us, we started off with only one Elixir app, so we didn't need the ability to maybe run multiple Elixir versions simultaneously on the same server. So this was actually quite a while ago. I don't know if Docker was super common yet with Elixir deploys, but anyways, whatever. We used Distillery back then.
E-deliver, wasn't it?
And
Yeah,
also E-deliver as well.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yes. So Distillery, if you're not familiar with it, builds a tarball. It has your code in it, also the Erlang runtime, like everything you need to run the app. So you can put it onto a really bare bones server that has almost nothing installed on it, and it can just run. And then E-deliver automates the various shell commands you need to run to, for example, shell out to a build server to build these releases, and then copy that to all of your servers that you want to copy to, and unpack them, run them, et cetera, et cetera. As as our needs started to grow, and we wanted to run things instead of Kubernetes, so we had automatic restarts of Docker images that crash or shut down or whatever, and also have other be able to run multiple Elixir apps, multiple versions on the same machines. Then we switched to Docker at that point. We kind of grew into Docker.
But the complexity, without Docker, is you do have to have like a build environment set up. And that's just a lot more work because that has to be maintained. And then if you want to start have multiple, we have our older code base, which is on Elixir 1.7, and we have some newer stuff that's on 1.9. Either you can't take advantage of the 1.9 because the build environment doesn't support it, or you have, you get that whole, it's like I have a whole dedicated EC2 instance just to building it occasionally, right? And so Docker is just like, it becomes the build environment.
And that's one of my favorite things about it. It's like when we were using 1.8, because that's what I had cached there, I just specified, 1.9, and boom, done.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you wanted, you could do a this is kind of, what you said kind of triggered a tangent in my head. If you wanted, you could do a multi-stage build of doing all the stuff we've done, then running mixed release or distillery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then copying that tarball into just like a scratch Docker image and
that's what we do with ours.
Oh, that is?
Yeah, so we have I loved your 3-stage with the node modules being separate. Haven't done that before. I will be tomorrow. But, so we have the 2-stage where it is like do the whole build and the asset compilation and everything, and then the final one is just the release. So you just pull the release into an Alpine image, so it's like, really small.
Mm-hmm. So from here, this is actually something you can dev with too, right? So a new teammate comes on, you just say, all right, to get started deving, run bin build. When you want to do some deving, you can do bin REPL, and boom, they have the exact same thing running on their machines as you. They do a git pull and they just dev on it. You saw the Docker compose run commands we did earlier with bash in this bin bash script. Boom, you have a container there that you can just start doing commands and messing around with just caveats around immutable file system. You delete the container, you lose the changes you made in there. From here we can start looking at volumes to have a better dev environment. You can start looking at Docker Compose and N files, and there's so many ways to build on this core layer of tooling to optimize the dev environment, the test environment, and the production environment that now that we know this, we could go anywhere we wanted talking about workflows or deployment or testing and CI pipelines.
I know Nanobox did something really cool, which I've used. I've deployed with them once.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that Phoenix is really nice is it opens up a WebSocket, so you get live updates as you're changing your code, your templates or whatever, your HTML templates. And suddenly, boom, before you can switch windows from your IDE to your browser, it's already updated. So I'm wondering if you know another way to do that through Docker other than what Nanobox did, or if you've wrote your own or something like that.
So I don't know how Nanobox did it. The people at Nanobox are really smart. I worked with them at PagodaBox actually. It's where I learned Erlang. I was with them. They're really cool people. So I don't know how they did it in Nanobox. What I've done is using Docker Compose. Has anyone here used Docker Compose?
Mm-hmm.
So most have not, a number have. Docker Compose is tooling on top of Docker, so you use a YAML configuration file to specify all of your Docker options. So here I have a .env containing some envars. And in my Docker Compose, I don't need a database, so I haven't put a Postgres or anything in there, but you can. I specify, here's my web, build from this directory. If it crashes, restart it for me. When I start you, by default, run mixphx server, pull your envars from this file, and bind on port 80 on my machine to port 4000 in the container. So what you can do is you can say, now, there are some nuances around this where you can get into a weird state, but for the most part this works. Volumes, and I want a mapping from my current directory to my app directory in my container. So if I do trying to think of the simplest way to show that this works without here. I have an alias, so a number of aliases actually. DCS actually isn't an alias; it's a full script because then I can pass in on certain other options. But yes, optimizing my workflow is I'm a junkie for that. It is true. So here you can see that I'm running things. I'm just going to add a testing file right here, and boom, there at the bottom right is my testing file in my container. Docker volumes.
While it was already running. Yeah, you didn't have to rebuild the container.
I did not have to rebuild.
It just showed up.
Yep. It mapped this directory to that directory.
Is that something you can only do with Docker Compose?
No, you can
No.
do it with
Oh, okay. Well, because the port thing is in the Dockerfile too,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah, you can do
duplicate,
volumes.
so what, I mean, so if Docker Compose wins?
It's so much more elegant.
And it gets handier when you have multiple containers. Like
Yes.
the data,
Yeah, well, I've seen
Postgres
that,
container
yeah.
might have like.
That is really the benefit to it. Is it's like it's the whole idea is composing multiple containers into a system.
Right.
So you're saying, like when you have a database, you're saying the web links to the database, so make sure the database starts up first, and so it's really nice.
Yep.
Yeah, duplicate things like the ports though, how does that, what happens there?
Pick and choose. You just pick, so Docker Compose will typically win out over what's in the Docker file. Things you
Yeah.
specify in the Docker file tend to be defaults rather than just like setting this always no matter what.
For
So
example, if you have like a single Postgres server, but you have multiple different apps you were doing, well, like Postgres like Docker, then you could have like, for this app that's running simultaneously, it's gonna be running on port whatever, this other app will be running on port.
Yeah, it's like
something
a,
different.
I'm testing lib cluster and I want 3 nodes on Docker, right?
Yeah, it helps, yeah, so you might not be able to rely upon defaults anymore because you
Yeah.
have two of the same.
Okay.
So just now, I added Postgres to this, pulling the Alpine version from Docker Hub, and it's pulling it right now. And I said my web depends on Postgres, so anytime I start a web container, it will make sure that a Postgres container is running. So if it's not already running, it will start it for me. If it is already running, great. So I didn't need it, but like now I can compose that. And then you start throwing in Redis for caching, and oh, hey, I have a second app, I want them to be able to communicate, and so I want them to, so this handles the networking aspect of that. Oh, and sometimes they talk using HTTP, but other times they talk using a message broker, so I can throw in Kafka and Rabbit and whatever else I use for messaging there. Like, Docker Compose creates what the Dockerfile does for a single container, Docker Compose is trying to do for a system of containers, just like these guys were saying. Cool. Thanks for coming.